Hello. Thank you so much, everybody. I know soon February come in and war freedom come in. Me, I say, it's not one day for black freedom. Black freedom is every day, not one man. Thank you so much for this organization and all of people to come together. We're very mixed here. Some people coming from Trinidad, some Guyanese, and back for the motherline is us, Africa. Remember that whatever happened, unity, the union is very important. Long time, we'll not get this plank, black power, but soon it's coming small. This event, who called me, is my first student in Canada. I brought them from Africa long time to go, 2006, from my own country, Guinea-Conakry. Thank you, Mr. William, to invite me and to present all people.
Amara Kante, our Toronto master drummer from the Malinke tradition. Make some noise. Amara Kante. On the djembe, this is Derek Thorne. The Dundun Fuller of Toronto, Joseph. What did you think of the dancers? Say hello to Aisha and to Leslie. Make some noise. Now I'm going to invite you to levez-vous from your seats for a moment so that you can have this last jump with us, okay? All right. Don't be shy. I know you've been sitting all morning. This is the time to get out of the seat, shake yourself a little bit.
Let's hear it again for the drummers and the ensemble dancers. Thank you. Woo! I don't know about you, but my heart rate has gone up. And that reminds me to, this is a slide I should have shown earlier today. And these are two of the most important individuals in the task force. We have Ika Washington. She's just invaluable. And she keeps us in order. She keeps our schedules in order. She is just the driving force for the task force. And we also have the organizer, the planner, the project manager of this event, Nina Weston. A big hand, please. Now, if your heart rate is up, you might want to check out some of the health specialists that are going to be in the middle there on the table. I'll just tell you what's happening. They're going to be setting up, and we're going to have a session or a table focused on diabetes and hypertension. Dr. Sean Wharton will be hosting that. There's a table on mental health. Dr. Adisa Azubik will be doing that. Breast cancer, Dr. Omoli. Prostate cancer, Dr. Emmanuel Abra. Vaccines, Trevor Aldridge. And vaccine allergy, Dr. Zainab Abaram. So check those out afterwards. But now we have our second and final keynote session. And I would like to invite our speakers up at this moment. First, Dr. Upton Allen. Would you like to come forward? Dr. Allen is the director of the Infectious Diseases Department of Pediatrics at the Hospital for Sick Children. Please, a round of applause. And we also have Angela Robertson. Now, Angela is dedicated to people and communities facing discrimination, poverty, and marginalization, and working to change those social conditions. And she's a founding member of Blackarama, which focuses on forging spaces for Black and other racialized LGBTQ+ people and allies in Toronto's Pride. Big hand for her, please. And the title of this session is Lessons That Must Be Learned from the COVID-19 Pandemic, a focus on Black community-led solutions.
Yeah. So go forward with this. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I thought I'll go first since my slides are up there. Let me say, first of all, how appreciative I am of all the work that the task force has done. And I really think that we owe just about everything to our leader, Kwato Kendi. So let's just give a Kwato, rounds of applause. The other thing that I think, I realized was that when I came on the task force, I had the privilege of meeting so many talented people. And it's just amazing how much talent there is. And so I just wanted, to give a shout out to everyone. I'm just going to ask each member of the task force who's here now to just put their hand up. Francis. Let's a round of applause for Francis. Celine. Angela, of course. Quad 2 earlier. Anyone else who is I'm missing? Oh, of course, Nakusha is there. Others, really appreciate all your efforts. To give you an idea of what I'll speak about, I put it on this slide where I'll make reference to how in the early days we saw the disproportionate representation of COVID among Black and racialized groups. This was seen in the UK, the United States, and in Canada. The role that the task force had, not only in the Toronto context, but Ontario and indeed Canada. And then the importance of key partnerships that were developed along the way. And then, of course, as you've seen today, the important role of co-benefits beyond COVID. So what I need to do is just orientate, see what I'm telling you. I'm just going to bring this around. Okay. One of the key things earlier on was the realization that Black individuals in the UK, the United States, and Canada were being disproportionately affected by COVID-19 and were more likely to die from COVID. And I must say that we owe a lot of gratitude to one of our colleagues, Kwame Mackenzie, for bringing the UK perspective. In fact, because they had data before we had in North America. And at that time, it was really quite clear that folks in the UK who were affected by COVID were much more likely to die if they were Black folks. This was very clear. When compared with whites, Black persons were at least twice likely to die from COVID when the data were adjusted for socioeconomics and some medical comorbidities. And then in the United States, with the reference being white folks in the United States, it was really quite clear that Black folks, Hispanics, were twice likely to be admitted to hospital, at least twice likely, and also likely to die as a result of COVID. And then, thanks to the efforts of a number of individuals, some are in this room today, we had some data generated from Toronto. And this also showed that Black folks were among those who were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And this particular slide is important. It's very early on. This is July 2020. And essentially, anywhere the black bar exceeds the mustard bar, it means that you're disproportionately affected by COVID. So you're getting more COVID than your share of the population. In that regard, earlier on, the only two groups who were not disproportionately affected by COVID were white folks as well as East Asians. And those are the data. So these data help to fuel the energy that led to the creation of the task force and the work that the task force has done has brought about significant change. And so I alluded to all the people who are involved, and again, we really appreciate the leadership of our quad in this regard to get everyone together. The task force recognized the crucial importance of appreciating the community's lived experiences. And in this regard, it was important to take advantage of the collective knowledge and making the appropriate connections so that we could address issues relating to COVID vulnerabilities and vaccination needs. We also recognized that we had to deal with current day realities of structural racism and socioeconomic issues. To that end, when we in Canada were getting ourselves getting our act together and trying to put things on paper, the CDC came out quite bluntly, quite clearly, and said very clearly that there were major health equity issues with respect to the risk of COVID. And at the core of those issues were discrimination and racism, health issues relating to poor access to healthcare and how healthcare was being utilized, the types of work that people did that put them on the forefront. For example, people who were highly exposed were frontline workers who had to work 2 or 3 jobs because of the earnings that they were getting were so low that they had to do 2 or 3 jobs. And what that meant was that you were tripling their exposure risk. And then, of course, the issues with respect to housing, where many people were living in overcrowded environments. And so these are core factors that were identified very earlier on. And as one of my colleagues said, you know, these socioeconomic factors were at the core of the risk of COVID, disproportionately affecting Black and racialized individuals, and that COVID was like the onion that brought out the tears associated with the socioeconomic issues. And so COVID was not the problem. COVID was really just the onion bringing out the tears. Now, we recognize that it was important that there was leadership on this, and I want to acknowledge, I know the mayor was here earlier, the important role that the City of Toronto played to ensure that we had equity with respect to the distribution of vaccine, that there were key partnerships that were take advantage of, and that we had a lot of connections with respect to various individuals coming together. TO supports was very crucial. I want to acknowledge the support of the city in that regard. Now, with respect to key partnerships, it was really quite clear at an early stage that it was important for trust to be built, and trust is not built overnight. And so the Black Scientist Task Force had to work with established groups of individuals who were already on the ground, so to speak. We had First Baptist Church and other churches, thanks to Wendell Gibbs, Taibu, Community Health Center, Black Creek, all played crucial role. Lee Ben, Cheryl Prescott, all important role in this regard. So these established partnerships helped the task force to gain traction at a very early stage and to move forward and build on other connections through the Black Physicians Association of Ontario, led by Dr. Norum, and then the Black North Initiative, the Health Committee, chaired by myself, and Kwame Mackenzie, and Black Opportunity Fund, among others. So the partnerships were really key moving forward. And in this regard, as I said, one doesn't want to reinvent the wheel. At least one doesn't need to invent all spokes in the wheel. And so we took advantage of other connections. And here was one arrangement where you heard from Isaac Adami earlier. Isaac and I set up a mechanism whereby we wanted to ensure that people, like many of you here today, who are going to provide information to others on issues relating to COVID and COVID vaccines, that you yourselves are well educated. We want to make sure that you had the facts. And so we set up a program called a Specially Targeted Educational Program Initiative out of Sick Kids, and had a number of webinars where we invited various educators to participate in those sessions so that we could educate the educators. We want to make sure that everyone, family doctors, nurses, community leaders, that you yourselves were well equipped with the right information. This particular one focused on clotting in relation to the vector vaccines. There's another one that focused on how do you vaccinate young children comfortably? And we invited people who are world-leading experts in the field like Anna Taddeo to come and speak to those issues. So again, there's all a partnership connection with the task force. Now, as we educated the educators, we realized that, there are just so many things that we just need to set right in terms of the information to make sure that people had the right information. That if people, as this relates to COVID vaccines, decided not to get vaccinated, we wanted to make sure that they did so based on the right information. And this is one example that I'll just illustrate in the next 2 or 3 slides, where people are saying, well, I don't want to be vaccinated. This vaccine was developed within a year or two, it's rushed and so forth. And say, wait a minute, let's just step back a little. And again, we benefited from the expertise of Dr. David Burt in this regard. So we learned the lessons from SARS-1 and the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome virus. In that regard, the virus that causes COVID is about 80% identical to the SARS-1 virus. And guess what? Shortly after the appearance of SARS-1 in 2002, 2004, work started to be done on the development of a vaccine directed at SARS-1, which is 80% identical to the COVID virus by chance. And in fact, there's a publication in 2009 talking about spike protein of SARS-1, 80% identical to COVID. So you see where this is going. So by the time COVID appeared, work had already been done on a virus that was 80% identical to COVID. And another way to look at it, as I told a bunch of folks recently in a talk I gave in Jamaica, and somebody in the audience said, so you mean, Dr. Allen, you're trying to tell us that is lucky we're lucky? And I said, yeah. In other words, by luck, it happens that COVID came years after SARS-1. If COVID had happened in 2002, 2004, we're toasted. The vaccine would have taken many years to develop. And so just by chance, this work had been done. So I think it's a really important point as you talk to and interact with others to bear that in mind. And so the Black Scientist Task Force brought that point out. David Burt, for example, is one of the people who worked on the SARS-1 vaccine. So we had that sort of background. There's another important point, and that is the mRNA vaccines were the subject of research, are still subject of research, years before COVID came along. And people were developing vaccines for things like prostate cancer, breast cancer, melanomas, other tumors. And I can tell you that many individuals who are suffering with these cancers or have family members who are at risk of or do have those, and they're saying, gee, I really hope we can get the cancer mRNA vaccines ready pretty soon. So we had this work that was being done as well. So when we talk about how rushed the vaccines were, I think it's really important to bear that in mind. There's one other point I want to make with respect to the speed at which vaccines were developed and the Black Scientist Task Force getting this word across. If you look at the road to the development of other vaccines, I'm going to choose one vaccine, a vaccine directed at a virus called RSV. You've heard a lot about the RSV vaccine. Work has been in progress on that vaccine since the mid-1960s. And the reason why we haven't had a vaccine yet is that along the way, some roadblocks occurred, some red signals occurred. And so when a vaccine like the COVID vaccines end up being developed and released quickly, it meant that along the way, imagine you're driving to work on a Sunday morning and it's all green lights. And that's essentially what has happened with respect to the COVID vaccines, is that there were no major issues of concern that would shut things down for years. Whereas with other vaccines, that is what happened. And so important to get across. So those are some of the things that the Black Scientists Task Force, and this is just one example of just trying to get information, the correct information across to individuals. Now, to do this, we needed credible messengers with relevant content, and I mentioned the names of some of those who are here today. We recognize the importance to be balanced in the discussions. We had to recognize the fact that, you know, there are issues around racism that we had to deal with. There's mistrust in the system. Many of us, people are asking me and others, well, who do you work for? I said, you know, I don't work for pharma. You know, I don't get any money from big pharma. So those are things that, you know, because people, you know, had a lack of trust, and so it took some time for us to ensure that people were very clear where we stood and who was supporting us or not supporting us. But we also need to recognize that there are historical issues. And the Black Scientists Task Force was very much aware of those historical issues that resulted in mistrust in government and the healthcare system. But we also recognize that as long as even though those historical issues are, you know, a fact, and this is one example of the Tuskegee experiment that you're all aware of, we needed to move beyond that and recognize that there were current day issues or challenges that had to be dealt with. And so it's really important that we recognize this. And so in that regard, one of the things that was really quite clear, that we felt that, yeah, we could frame the distrust in terms of a historical perspective, but maybe focusing on everyday racism and discrimination rather than historical atrocities was important. Now, as part of the whole process of information sharing and ensuring that people have the right information, we had to gather data. And so in that regard, it was important, and many of you have heard me speak about this, it was important for data to be generated from affected communities. And I've given the example of trying to do the average study in Ontario, where Ontario has like about 4.75, let's say 5%, you know, Black people. And you wanted to do a study and you wanted 1,000 Ontarians. How many Black people are going to be represented in the average study? 50. That won't be enough to generalize and draw any conclusions. And so what it meant was that we had to identify strategies that would oversample or create enough numbers of Black people in projects. And I was pleased to co-lead some of these studies with people like Carl James, others, to get data to be generated from Black communities. So it's really important so that we can generalize from the data that we obtain. But we also recognize the importance of advocating for the appropriate data to be collected. You saw that that graph earlier on with respect to the gray bars and the mustard bars that I already alluded to. And so the importance of collecting the race-based data is something that many of us have advocated for and will continue to advocate for. Now, finally, and this is a really important point that is brought out by the work that is being done here today, that you could be talking about COVID, you could be talking about research, about many things, but you have to recognize that people are dealing with other issues like high blood pressure, diabetes, and so on and so forth. And I never forget, I'll share this example with you, and I think I told Carl about this example. So we were running a research clinic at Black Creek, and we were enrolling this lady from an island in the Caribbean. I'll leave out the island just to, keep some confidentiality there. And And she said, yeah, she was interested in taking part in this COVID research stuff. But she said, Doc, would you be able to examine my husband's prostate? And I'm saying, oh, wait a minute, no, we're not set up to do that. But, you know, what we will do is that we'll make an arrangement for your husband to be seen. And the point is that you might be focused on one thing, such as COVID, but what happens when somebody comes in with their prostate issues or their blood pressure issues or their sugar issues? You can't ignore that. And so the importance of co-benefits is recognized earlier on by the task force. And so we're really extremely pleased with the effort that the task force, again, led by Quarter, has been able to provide to the community in a manner that not just focuses on COVID, but on other aspects of health promotion to enhance the health of Ontarians, and particularly members of the Black community. So with that, I will stop, and thank you so much. Again, it's a pleasure to be here.
Hello, hello, hello. Let's see if I can manage this technology. Yeah. So really lovely to be here. My name is Angela Robertson, and longtime member of this community, but also longtime friend of Akwatu, one of your key organizers, going back to the early days of JCA Youth Group. Where was that? Dundas and Keel or somewhere over there. So really, you've had a full day where you've heard about the differential, disproportionate impact of COVID on Black populations. So I don't want to spend my time there repeating what you have heard, other than sharing this slide and leaving that up for you to look at. But to contextualize that, while we as Black folks knew when COVID hit that we would be differentially and disproportionately and negatively impacted by COVID, we were being told that, and we were seeing what was happening with the early data coming out of the US, coming out of the UK. But we were being told here in Canada that, you know, not really going to happen in the we as Black folks without the data is then dismissed as anecdote and stories. And I'm saying, and I think we have heard and you have heard from the presentation this morning, that we want to move from being anecdotes and examples. We want to have the data so that the data can be used as evidence to really inform and make structural changes to the things that impact Black life. Now, I want to really just run into what does it mean for I'll skip that. So Dr. Allen spoke to what are the things that made a difference. And our speakers and other panelists, we as a community were enabled and supported, and those of us who are in here who have survived and continue to survive COVID and its differential impacts, is that was made possible by the organizing of Black community members, organizing for Black community. Yeah? So one of COVID's learning for us is that we knew and we know that we can support our communities. And it was individuals like this group, but it was also the folks out of Black Creek, the folks out of Jane Finch, the folks out of JCA, the folks out of the Black Physicians Association. We demonstrated that we can do for ourselves if we are provided the resources to enable that to happen. And remember that when COVID's first vaccine efforts were launched, is that we were in a vaccine scarcity. Now, the irony is that during this vaccine scarcity, the places that had higher rates of COVID had significantly lower access to vaccines. These were also the places where we live, where, as you heard, there are larger numbers of folks who are in precarious employment, who are taking crowded TTC at a time when we're hearing about physical distancing. So we were pressed up in conditions that made us more vulnerable to COVID, but we were not, and we were seeing higher rates of COVID, but we were not being given access to the vaccine at the same rate as others who had less risk. But again, it was a group and these kinds of groups that mobilized us to get the vaccine that we need. Now, I want to get to some comments about, so what does this mean? What have we learned from all of the efforts that communities put in? What change should look like? And I think what change should look like is that it cannot mean that we believe that a return to homeless shelters is the answer to COVID's response to homelessness and the magnifying of homelessness. If you don't know, you should know that within the sheltering system, Black folks make up, those who self-identify, Black folks make up over 30% of the folks who are in Toronto's homeless sheltering system. So in my mind, housing and affordable housing is an anti-Black racism response. It cannot mean the mayor was here earlier and I was just beside myself, not because the mayor was here, but because the mayor was here speaking to Black folks. At the same time, the mayor was purporting and is recommending a 48%, a $48 million increase to a $1 billion policing budget. And we know that as Black folks, we are on the receiving end, the adverse receiving end of policing in our communities. So again, I dare say that investment in policing is not the answer that Black folks need in a post-COVID recovery. That we must push for and support community-led crisis response teams to take policing out of mental health crisis response. We must push for the targeted investment of Black and Indigenous mental health supports, because that is what we need and that is what will save our lives. And that is what it means to not return to a pre-COVID normal. As I said earlier, it can also mean we do not push for race disaggregate sociodemographic data collection, because we need to move from being anecdotes and stories of lived experience in research and planning to having the data, as many of the scientists here have spoken about. It also cannot mean that we do not invest in services at the local. We saw the targeted responses that were where COVID's response was brought to community by trusted entities in community, by providers who look like us and we saw the response. So we were initially casted as slightly, not just hesitant, but maybe even anti-vax. And many of us in this room have that lovely little mark from where we may come from in various places that said that we were vaccinated. Yeah? So it is a myth to look at Black folks and equate us with the quote unquote freedom movement of anti-vaxxers. It cannot mean that health services recovery means that we do not tend to the backlog and of accessing procedures and specialist care when we know that Black folks, so the system is saying we're doing recovery. So all of those folks who are in the queue for surgical service recovery, specialist access, is that we're building a plan so that we can respond to those folks. Now, we know that for many of us, Black folks have not entered the queue to enter those lists, to respond and to benefit from those recovery strategies. So we therefore need different kind of strategies in this healthcare recovery space to ensure that we get on the list for COVID recovery effort in both primary care, in specialist care, and surgical services recovery. COVID recovery means that we cannot not be concerned about digital equity. Canada, of all the OECD countries, have some of the highest costs for data service. As services move into the virtual, so virtual care, login, this means that we are disadvantaged when the cost for those digital platforms is so high, the data cost is so high, yet our income remains static, if not declining, because of COVID's economic impact and differential impact on Black communities. It also cannot mean that we settle for mere representation in politics and positions. So in the post Black life, in the post murder of George Floyd, what we saw is positions being handed out for what I say is mere representation. And I'm suggesting to you that we cannot settle for mere representation, because the gesture of the system will be, well, you have Angela, she's Black, you should be okay. But you may not be able to rely on Angela's politics as a politic that is vested in Black people's interests. So representation for us needs to be twinned with a politic that is about our betterment, our improvement. So therefore, I ask you in recovery to be cautious when positions are being handed out and when folks are in line to take positions, because we need to also hold ourselves accountable for when we assume positions, because you need to benefit us when you occupy those roles. It also cannot mean that in this moment of reconciliation, that we are not doing the work that we do as Black people for Black people without being in solidarity with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples' demand for reconciliation and swift implementation of recommendations out of the Truth and Reconciliation Report. And I say that because we, many of us, most of us, came here as part of that transatlantic slave trade. And in that project, we were brought here to be laborers. We were brought here to be bought and sold. Some of us came here as immigrants and newcomers. But we also know sometimes that we also get pitted against Indigenous people about, and suggesting somehow that there isn't enough on the plate to go around, so we can only respond to one group at a time. And I would say that what COVID has taught us is that there is more than enough resources to go around. It is just that there isn't the political will. There isn't the political will to distribute and enable communities to get access to those resources to sustain our lives. Yeah? So I would say to you, in COVID, We saw billions spent because there was a potential, and there is an economic impact. I would say that COVID brought an urgency to action. I would say that the presence of anti-racism in our lives as Black people brings that same urgency. I would say that the disproportionate deaths that we've experienced as a result of COVID brings that same urgency. I would say that numbers of our community members who are incarcerated brings that same level of urgency. I would say that the same number of young people who cannot find employment and meaningful employment in our communities is that urgency. And therefore, we need to push back against that political notion of scarcity. Resources are not scarce. There are decisions that are deliberately made that says you will not get because the interest is over here and your interest is not our interest. And I'm saying we from these gatherings need to decide that we will no longer wait. So I really implore you, some of us, we've been saying these things for years and years and years. And there's an impatience I now have. So, to the organizers, when I pop off on Mayor Tory, I didn't really pop off, I just pointed some questions. I think we need to respond to this moment with both haste, with urgency, and with purpose. And we need to be unapologetic in naming the presence of anti-Black racism and its pernicious ways of demonizing our communities, of demoralizing our spirit, but also of impoverishing us materially in this city. So I leave you with a quote from a dear, dear James Baldwin when he says, "It has taken others' time. It has taken my mother's time. It has taken my uncle's time, my brother's time, my sister's time. How much more time do you want for your progress?" So I thank you deeply. Thank you.
Powerful. That was a powerful message. Thank you, Angela and Upton. And we have time for a few questions. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please come to the front here and I'll set up a mic for you.
Check 1, 2. Hello, everyone. I'm hoping most of you know who I am. I've been an advocate for justice, rights, and freedom for all Canadians, but specifically the Black community. And my question to both of you is, and I wish I could be here for the second panel, but I have prearranged things that I have to do. But in your discussions, you spoke about the Black community being perceived as a community that doesn't take vaccines. We all know that, right? My question, and I have a series of questions, and I'll ask everyone patience with me so I can ask them, because what I've seen over the past 3 years is a dialogue that is one-sided. We hear the perspectives that have been put forward today, but we rarely hear any alternative or any questions that actually challenge the evidence-based things that we seem to believe. I'm having conversations with people who have a very good, but it's all based on what I would call inaccurate information. So I'm going to ask you both this. When the death rate for COVID across Canada for cases is 1%, is it justified to push an mRNA injection that does not stop contraction or transmission and is known to have serious side effects? So that's one thing. With 1% of cases resulting in death, and majority of those are over 80 years old with comorbidities, is it justified that a blanket approach be taken across the entire community when there's potential for side effects? Second, when death rate in Canada, period, it's 0.1% from COVID, why are we putting all of these resources into this specific situation when our community suffers from gun violence, poverty, systemic discrimination? The disproportionate likelihood of dying based on race, which you've talked about, both of you. You've talked about the fact that Blacks are more likely to die from COVID, but Blacks are more likely to die from life, period. And that has been existent long before COVID. So why are we using the fact that we have less money, less resources, we're discriminated against, we're targeted, as a reason to justify pushing this vaccine on our community? Yeah, you can. I'll give you a chance to answer. And then my last question is this: why is vaccines being pushed when we know natural immunity lasts longer, it adjusts to variants, and does not come with the side effects that vaccination does? And I have more, but I thank you all for being patient with me, because I think this is very important that a dialogue happen.
No, I think these are all great questions. And as one of the challenges that the Black Scientist Task Force face is the situation where there are, in a package of questions, with all due respect, or bits and pieces of information are just absolutely correct, and there are others that are not as accurate as they sound. And so, for example, and I'll just, speak to the question of vaccinating people, and why is it that people get vaccinated, and who dies and who doesn't die, and what is it that vaccines are doing. And maybe one of the things that we mean in the scientific community could have articulated more clearly is exactly what is it they're trying to prevent with vaccines. And perhaps the way to think about all of you is perhaps a focus on 3 or 4 outcomes. Number one, if you get vaccinated, you'd want to make sure you don't die. And the vaccines are amazing at that. Number two, if you get vaccinated, if you get COVID, you don't end up in the ICU or in hospitals. And number three, if you get vaccinated and you get COVID, that you're not laid up for weeks and weeks and weeks and have long COVID and all of that stuff. And guess what? The vaccines work very well against those. And but you might still get mild illness. And the way to think of it is like chickenpox. You get vaccinated, you shouldn't die from chickenpox, and you shouldn't get severe chickenpox, but you might get mild chickenpox. And so I agree that maybe we should have articulated that a little bit more clearly with respect to what is it that we're trying to prevent with vaccines. The other point that I think is worth noting is when we talk about mortality rates, when we talk about who's dying, it's really important to recognize some of the data that I showed on the slides. People who are dying from COVID were people that looked like most of us in this room. And so it's really important to recognize who is being affected disproportionately by COVID, not just in terms of who gets ill, but who dies. Now, all vaccines have side effects, but it boils down to an issue of benefits versus risks. People like myself, Dr. Burt, Angela and others, we just want to make sure that all of you and you have the right information to make the right decisions. If when we provide you with that information, you feel that perhaps you're not going to get vaccinated, that's okay. We just want to make sure that people aren't making decisions on wrong information. I'll give you an example. Start of the pandemic, I was at a clinic, a Black Creek clinic that Angela alluded to, and I was talking about the flu vaccine. And because, as I said, you can't just talk about COVID. And I said to this group of young men, there's about a dozen of them, how many of you, they were like, late 20s, 30s, how many of you, including some with underlying diseases like asthma, how many of you have gotten the flu vaccine? And this guy said, I will never get that vaccine because I don't understand why, for all these years, you're injecting people with the flu virus that causes the flu to prevent the flu. And then when I explained to him that the vaccine that is injected is not a live viral vaccine, he said, well, no one never told me that before. You mean that all these years when I've been refusing the flu vaccine, it was based on a wrong reason. And so we just want to make sure you have the right reasons. And if you decide not to get vaccinated, it's your right. But we just want to make sure you have correct information. So I know I've said a lot and you've asked a lot of questions. One that I just want to leave you with is just do remember who's dying, who's disproportionately affected, and what exactly the vaccines are doing. And vaccines may not prevent you from getting COVID, but should prevent you from having the severe outcomes from COVID, including mortality. And as a physician, I can tell you, I've lost, in terms of people I've known as colleagues and people who I'm aware of over the pandemic, 8 physicians who have died from COVID. And I haven't even counted the nurses that I've heard of and other individuals that I've heard of. I'm just using that as an example. So I encourage you, as you make your decisions moving forward, just make sure that it's based on correct information.
Just a chance to respond, sir. Sir.
Sorry, maybe just before you
Yes.
go on with a follow-up, I just want to pick up on I think one of your second or third question around the resources being spent in relation to COVID and where are the other places that those resources are needed. I think I was speaking to that when I spoke about education, justice, community, and therefore that investments that were made in COVID are investments that now need to be invested in communities. So I think that, I hope you're not hearing that this panel and or this convening is suggesting that that the expenditure that is needed is only expenditure in the spaces of COVID, because we know that the things that impact Black life and the health of Black people reside not just in the nexus of COVID, but in the nexus of poverty, in the nexus of the justice system, education, etc. So just wanting to raise.
Thank you for that. Dr. Bird, I just want to respond to Bren's general statement. You said that you're providing the information to people. And yes, you've provided information, the Black Health Science Table has, but it's been one-sided information. And what I'm concerned about is one of the doctors earlier today spoke about SARS and said that the majority of people who got SARS died. That's false. 17% was the fatality rate for SARS, right? So when we're talking about giving information, and sir, you just said, if you're vaccinated, you're less likely to die, less likely to go to the hospital, less likely to be sick. That's also false. I'm not vaccinated. I've never been to the hospital. I haven't died. I've had the virus that I've had since I was a child. I was sick for 5 days. Yes, you get sick. This is something normal. So I'm extremely concerned that our community that prides itself on health, prides itself on athleticism, prides itself on being safe from outside forces, is now utilizing very smart people, very willing people to do good things, to turn our community against what our natural instinct is, which is to avoid this system that's taking place, because it's very clear to us that this is more than COVID. This is about social control. It's okay, it's clear to me. And just like, okay, you know what, sir? Yelling at me at this time is not
Okay,
appropriate.
okay.
And that's why I'm speaking.
Older folks were dying at a very high rate. And we have a duty, be quiet, we have a duty to older Black folks to protect them. And so the fact that you're not dying should not be reason enough for you not to worry about Black people who are dying in long-term care homes. My colleagues who are dying, I had severe depression because I worked in long-term care home. COVID response was a community response. You're worried about yourself. Okay? Yes.
Okay.
First of all, I'm worried about I have to respond and then I'll put the mic down.
No, I think
First
we
of all,
need.
I'm not, sir.
I think you need to
This
have
is a
some
one-sided.
questions from
This is
other
a
people.
one-sided debate. Okay. I'm concerned about our community. I've shown
Yes,
that through my actions.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
Let me talk.
Excuse me. This is not a debate, and I think that
What
that type of
it's
discussion.
an information session, is
No,
it not?
But this type of
And
discussion.
I'm speaking clearly and politely to
yes,
everybody
I
here.
agree. I think
He
you've
said
had
something to me. I'm going to respond and then I will stop.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not spreading anything false. 0.1% is the death rate for Canada. That's not false. Okay. I'm concerned about our entire community and the fact that we're leading our children down a path of accepting things that are harmful to their health.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Sir, can we sit down? Can we sit down, please? Can we sit down, please? Yeah, can we sit down? Does anyone have one more question, one more comment they would like to make? One love. That's Please, sir. Please, sir, you've had your questions. We answered your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate your questions. Thank you. Now, I think I would like to thank our panelists and our speakers. Okay, let's move on. Woo. I love the passion. But we have to have some organization and some respect. So thank you both for your participation and for answering the questions and for reminding us that there's still a lot of work to do in terms of our health, our people's health. Thank you. A big hand for our panelists. Thank you very much. I just want to let you know that we've moved the health specialists out of this main auditorium for obvious reasons, and they're in the corridor there. So if you want to ask questions, diabetes, hypertension, mental health, breast cancer, prostate cancer, vaccines, vaccine allergy, go out into the foyer there. We're going to start with our next panel. This is the final panel of the day, so don't go anywhere.
I do want to make a quick note on what just happened. I think it's very easy to come into it's been a really great day so far without knowing all of the things that we've talked about today, all of the discussions that we've had, and want to be inflammatory to push your own agenda. So I hope that you guys will, you know, uh, take access all of the great services that we have here today, and know that this isn't just about COVID. This is about your health overall and all of the impacts that affected. These are things that we're talking about today. How do we move from COVID beyond? We know that COVID has impacted us a great deal. What it's done, it's shone a light on these iniquities, and now we need to move forward and address them. So I apologize for that ghetto-ness. No. Yes, go. Thank you. All right, guys, so we have our final panel discussion today. So I'm gonna ask each of our speakers to come up after I introduce them. Our moderator for the last panel is Selena Caesar Chavan, who is over here. She is a business consultant. She's an author, a coach, and international speaker. She currently serves part-time as a senior advisor at EI Initiatives and is an adjunct lecturer at Queen's University. Selena, you may know her as your former MP of Whitby. If anyone's from Whitby here, thanks for joining us. And Parliamentary Secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and Parliamentary Secretary to International Development. Please welcome our moderator, Selena Caesar Chavan. And thanks, guys, for still being here. I know it's been a long day. All right, next up we have Dr. Gervin Fearon. Dr. Fearon is the president of George Brown College in Toronto. He previously served as the president and vice chancellor at Brock University and at Brandon University. His career also included roles at the Treasury Board at the Ontario Ministry of Finance. Also served on numerous community boards, including Ontario Trillium Foundation, Brandon Urban Aboriginal Peoples Council, United Way Niagara, and Tropicana Community Services. Today, Dr. Fearon will be talking about or giving his expertise on economic equity. Please welcome Dr. Fearon. Okay, next up we have Angela Cook. Angela is an Assistant Deputy Minister and Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing in the province of Ontario. Hello, hey. She's a former Associate Deputy Minister of Housing, Construction Standards, Multiculturalism, and Anti-Racism for the province of British Columbia. She is an experienced public service executive at the provincial, regional, state, and municipal government level in the nonprofit social housing, anti-racism, equality and diversity programs and services in the UK and Canada. She will be giving her expertise on housing today. Thanks. All right, guys. You guys all tired from Soka Size? Okay, next up we have Dr. Carl E. James. Amazing. Dr. James holds the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community, and Diaspora in the Faculty of Education, and is also the advisor on equity and representation in the Office of the VP of Equity, People, and Culture at York University. Dr. James will be giving his expertise on education. And last but not least, Lemty. Yes. She is the Deputy Medical Officer of Health at the City of Toronto. Dr. Lemty obtained her medical degree at the University of Toronto, as well as degrees in epidemiology and public health management from Yale, and a Bachelor of Liberal Arts from Princeton University. Dr. Lemke will be sharing her expertise on public health. All right, guys. You ready?
So thank you, Dr. Todd, for that. I'll invite our panelists to take a seat. And just before we get started, I'll let each of them introduce themselves and then do a 5-minute presentation just so that you know how the order of operations is going to go. And then we're going to open it up for questions. But I think just before we start that, one of the questions that came before was, what are some of the other things that we can be doing? And I think this esteemed panel will talk about education, housing, public health, and how those intersect with what a new normal could look like, how we could come out of COVID looking for solutions that take the lens of anti-Blackness into perspective. And I thank you all for being here today. So I'm just going to start on the top of the panel here and go to Dr. Fearon. If you could just introduce yourself and 5 minutes on what COVID looks like when it comes to our education system and how we could bolster that to prevent what we saw.
Thank you very much. And just procedurally, do you want me to stand up there or just sit here?
You could stand or sit, whatever you feel comfortable doing.
Let's see about standing, okay?
Do you want to put the mic?
So first item, I'd just like to really thank everyone for being here and thank the organizers for making this possible. This is an incredible event, not only the idea of bringing people together, but bringing community together. And I think we should give, before I start, a round of applause to all the organizers and their hard work in making this possible. As I start in, I want to recognize that I've got about 5 minutes, so I'll try to be really quick and succinct. The first comment I'd make is just a recognition that an important social determinant of health is economic stability and economics. And consequently, then when we start thinking about recovery and we start thinking about going forward and we start thinking about health, what we're doing in terms of economics and in terms of our own financial health, it becomes a core ingredient. A few items that I've listed, and again, I'm being really quick, but want to be respectful of my other panelists as well. And I'd like to touch on 5 items. And the first one is, I think as we go forward, one of the incredible things that we've seen come through the pandemic scenarios is precisely what's happening today. Organizations such as the task force stepped up to be able to bring expertise and people together to be able to look at the betterment of community. JCA, we've got individuals from JCA here, from Tropicana and the likes. All those organizations stepped up to make sure that the community had access. And I think that's an important ingredient on a go forward as part of the recovery, and that these organizations that got formed through a crisis then also have to be a part of community development and community betterment as we go forward out of the crisis as well. The second one that I would like to make mention is just taking a look at the response of government to what was a significant economic fallout across at a global level, so not just within Canada. And what we saw in general was an effort by government to stabilize business activity and so forth. We can all remember the incredible shutdown that was happening in businesses, people not going in, people staying at home, and consequently a substantial amount of transfer payments were then put forward by government. One of the interesting things that became quite evident within the Black community and other communities is that initially to access those funds, you had to be a registered business. So that means that you had to operate your business not simply as a cottage industry or a part-time activity, you needed to be registered. And what that tells us is that within the community, because so many of the businesses were not registered, they had a significant negative impact on them at the beginning. What that also means then coming out as part of the recovery, it really is important that business and entrepreneurs look at themselves, no matter how small or how large, that they are engaged in a really important activity in terms of economic activity, in terms of the stability of the community and families. Get registered, get a bank account, business bank account, pay the taxes, because those are all going to be significant determinants as to what kind of subsidies, what kind of assistance you can avail yourself of in the future. A second item that I'd just like to really touch on is the incredible change in the structure of the economy during this time period. And I could give all kinds of examples and so forth, but I want some examples that we all can relate to very quickly. One of the interesting items is that if you were thinking of ordering a meal during COVID, quite often you weren't going to the restaurant per se. You're going to pick up the phone, you're going to order online and so forth. And what that meant then is if you were operating a small business and you didn't have point of sale, you didn't have a client relations system, by way of example, your business was going to be significantly impacted by the inability to have your customers access you through websites and so forth. Well, coming out of COVID, that is now the norm. And that means then that within the Black community, as we take a look at businesses and the adoption of direct technology to interact with customers, that will be fundamental to their success. So a quick example is if I go to a restaurant today, quite often someone will show up with a handheld, they'll get my information, I'll go walking around wherever, I'll get a message saying that my seat is available and I'll show up. If I go to a barbershop today, that technology has not been adopted. Now you may say to yourself, it's really great, it's cultural, we all get to talk, you know. As I say, I get to practice my patois, I'm going, I'm gonna say, wow, go on, and Woolworks, you know. It's good stuff, right? Nothing wrong with that. The next part of it, though, is that there are two parts. One is that we're causing our customers not to show up, but we're also misusing the time of members of the community. And that opportunity cost and that time loss is significant and shouldn't be underestimated. So as we come out of COVID, the adoption of technology in small businesses and medium-sized businesses within the community will be a significant determinant of their competitiveness and their future profitability. Investment, the next one that I'd like to talk about. One of the interesting things going through COVID was that a significant amount of monetary and fiscal policy stimulus what came to bear. And what that meant then is quite often when you see that, you see interest rates go down, government expenditures go up, a significant increase in the portion of individual income coming through from government expenditures and the likes. Well, where does that all show up? That show up in asset prices. What are asset prices? House prices increases, stock prices increase and the likes. If by some chance as a community, we have a lower proportion of households owning their home or saving and investing, that means that those individuals didn't benefit from that broad economic activity. So going forward, a strategy that will be really, really important, especially for intergenerational wealth, is to take a look at what is the rate and percentage of ownership, what percentage of savings individuals are doing, and what percentage are individuals investing. The next item is one of the interesting things that community organizations did. The social services organization broadening what they offer to include financial literacy understanding will be really, really important to the health of families within the community. Lastly, I'd like to talk about small and medium-sized businesses. And one of the items as we think about technological we've got Carl James here, and he'll speak to that, of course. Education will be such an important play in terms of resiliency and ability to adjust to economic changes and technological changes. So I'll leave the education component apart. But the next part of education is what we see in small and medium-sized businesses. Is actually associated with small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. 60-70% of employment is directly related to those businesses. Well, who and what are those businesses? % of the Black or 6% of the university population actually come from the Black community. We make up 3.5% of the population. So in some senses, there is a significant representation. However, a significant amount of that talent from coming out of university, coming out of college, has to be in starting up small and medium-sized businesses. And you might say, why does it matter? Well, when you start up a small business, you quite often will employ people who you know. And that means then you end up employing people in the community. And if we aren't starting small and medium-sized businesses, then that also means that our unemployment rate within the community is likely going to be higher than that of the general population. Could go on for more, lots of work to do, but just again, like to congratulate this organization on the incredible work done, and thank you for having me as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fearon. And I think I tagged you with education, but it was economic equity. Yes. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll now bring up Angela Cook, who will. Is this you? Sorry, is that you? No? Yeah, she's ready. Okay. Okay, yeah, no, fine. We'll bring up Angela Cook, who will talk about housing.
So good afternoon.
Is it on?
Yeah. I've got a presentation. But I don't think Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you very much for waiting until the end of the day to have an opportunity to speak and to listen to every one of us on the panel. So today I come to you as the most recently appointed Assistant Deputy Minister of Community and Supportive Housing at the Province of Ontario. So I joined the province 2 weeks ago, and I feel that I'm very fortunate to have the opportunity to be able to help to support the much needed community and supportive housing that's needed here in the province of Ontario. But most importantly, to be able to have a seat at the table, to be able to advocate and to promote the need for housing solutions for the Black community. So that's not just more community and supportive housing, but it's recognizing and addressing that within our community, we have individuals that suffer from developmental delay, from mental health, that are coming out of criminal justice system. And they need culturally appropriate solutions to be able to support them to have stable housing. And so within my role, not only am I going to be making sure that we are supported in terms of the programs and services that are delivered, but part of what I will be doing is working on the new initiative that the government is leading around building the 1.5 million new homes. Now, I know that that's quite controversial, but what I will say to you all is that we know certainly that homelessness is a huge issue also in our community. We're also overrepresented on all of the by name waiting lists right across the province. And we know that we're much more likely to spiral into homelessness because either we are receiving low levels of income, we live in precarious housing, or ultimately we are more likely to be evicted by our landlords. Sorry about this. I'll just keep going. It's fine. Keep going. And so one of the things that, that I will be working on with the teams right across the ministries is really taking a look at how we can make sure that we're providing good homes for everyone. And through my work that I was doing in British Columbia around the Belonging in BC strategy, where I worked at making sure that there were homelessness solutions and making sure that people with mental health and addictions and those young people leaving the CAS system had access to supported and housing. I'll be making sure that here in Ontario that we're addressing some of those solutions. We do know that from the pandemic that there was a requirement for multi-ministry responses, not only from the Ministry of Housing, but also we had to work with our health colleagues and also the Ministry of Attorney General and also Social Development and Poverty Reduction. And so some of the work that I want to be able to do, not only within my role, is engaging stakeholders, but I want to get out and hear from the communities on the ground. Although I'm familiar with the Toronto landscape, I have been away for 3 years. And so now I want to be able to leverage the opportunity to hear from community again, to make sure that the public policy solutions that we are looking to put in place truly meet the needs of Black Ontarians. And so we know that right now, as an equity-seeking group, we are overrepresented in community housing. In Ontario, 3% of the social housing population is made up of Ontarians. But as Black people, we represent 14%. That's nearly 5 times more than the average. And that's a startling figure, because what that says is that once people get into community or social housing, it's very, very difficult for them to get out. And so part of the work that we need to do is looking at why that is and what are some of the solutions to make sure that people have other opportunities to rent alternative forms of housing, but also more importantly, as Gavin mentioned, that we start to help our community get access to being able to purchase homes and to generate wealth for themselves. And so right now, I'm working with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Anti-Racism Cultural Working Group. And so that's really talking about how we can make sure that those individuals inside government have a real wholesome understanding of what are the needs of our community. And when they are designing policies and programs, that they are truly testing them to make sure that they're going to meet the needs of Black people in Ontario. So one of the things that I wanted to also share with you today, we know that you want to hear about some of the tangible things that we are doing. So you may have heard that in April of last year, my ministry colleagues in long-term care and health, they announced that they were going to be working in the region of Durham to develop the first Afro-Caribbean long-term care facility. And this will primarily make sure that people from our community, when they need to receive enhanced levels of care, are able to receive them in a culturally appropriate way. And I'm really excited that I'm going to have the opportunity to be able to not only get engaged with the folks that are going to make sure that this project is delivered, but also making sure that for community, you get the services that you need from this program. Also, we work very closely with the City of Toronto around the Safe Project, recognizing that in a lot of communities, we need to make sure not only where we're providing housing, that we're responding to the community trauma and the violence and injustice and harm and victimization that happens to Black people who live in communities around Ontario and in Toronto. And also, I'm working with Toronto Community Housing around the Confronting Anti-Black Racism strategy. And some of you may know that most recently they did develop a centre for advancing the interests of Black people. And so in the next little while, I'll be reaching out just to understand what are the programs and services that we are providing for Black people living in Toronto community housing, and what are some of the impacts that programming is having. And then finally, I want to talk to you about a project that's outside of Toronto, recognizing that we all don't just live either in Toronto, in Halton, in Durham, or in York. So the region of Waterloo most recently have recognized that they have a growing population of Black people. And so they've developed a new rent equity seeking assistance program. And what that program is going to do is look at how we can support Black people to get on the housing ladder by leveraging the affordable housing grant that is available to the dollar value of up to $50,000 to help folks bridge that gap to being able to provide a deposit to buy a home. They'll also be working with community service agencies to help strengthen the services that they provide to Black people, and also support social and economic inclusion. And so, as I said, I've just recently joined the province. I am coming to the end of week 2. I do have quite a lot of goals and aspirations that I want to achieve in this role. And I think I want to finish off by saying, you know, I come to this role with a huge amount of lived experience. I've lived in community housing, so I understand some of the issues and challenges of being a social housing tenant. I've worked in the community and social housing sector, so I've been on the other side advocating at an operational level to make sure we deliver programs. I see it as my role duty to advocate on your behalf to make sure that as we move forward with a meaningful housing strategy for Ontarians, that Black people are represented and see them, and also can access those programs and services just like any other Ontarian. And with that, I'd just like to thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. Dr. Lamptey, to talk a little bit about public health and what that looks like going forward. Dr. Lamptey, yep. No, that's not working.
Thank you so much to Dr. Kenty and the other organizers for giving me the immense honor to be on this panel, to be a participant on the task force. I think I almost fell onto the task force because I heard about it, I think the first week I arrived in Toronto in the middle of the pandemic, drove halfway across the country to come home. And I came home because the call was great. Our community was hurting. I remember shedding many tears in the first week that I started work, that 2 people I knew passed away from COVID. But what does it mean to be home? Home means where the relationships that you have matter, and that therefore the activities that you do have meaning. So I often try and explain the role of a public health physician is to be a physician to all of you. The 2.7 million residents of Toronto are all my patients. I work with Dr. Davila, the other medical officers of health, all the other talented health professionals in the health unit to promote and protect health. So what does that mean? Well, if I'm doing my job well, if Dr. Davila is doing her job well, you may not even notice that we're doing it. The pandemic was unusual for many reasons. It gave us a lot of profile that we don't usually receive outside of an emergency. But if we look at the things that affect our health, often the work on them has to go that we assume should be part of a high level of health in our communities are more obvious when they're missing. So for example, if you woke up this morning and you turned on the tap and you had a delicious, refreshing glass of City of Toronto tap water, you assumed that it was going to be refreshing and that it wasn't going to make you ill and that it was going to be clean and safe. space, you didn't today, you probably assumed that as you crossed the intersection, that you were going to be okay, because how we care for each other as we cross that intersection. All of those things impact your health, and public health is working behind the scenes to make the default space and position one that promotes health, not one that takes it away. I share all these examples because the work of public health means that we work with community partners. I see Angela here nodding vigorously. She is a passionate leader. We work with people like her, with Dr. Kenty, and others in the community, as well as political leaders, to name the issues that are threatening the health and well-being of our communities, describe them scientifically, as well as from the experience of people who are challenged by them, and then work together with all those leaders and community members to make those issues as invisible as the clean drinking water and safe air that you're breathing right now. So if I were to distill those roles into 3 actions, they would be: 1, public health helps identify the issues facing our communities. We work with communities to come up with ways to address them. And then we try and ensure that everybody, and I mean everybody, has the opportunity to benefit from those solutions. So we don't advance health overall if we don't address health equity. Everybody has the need to have the opportunity for full health. So when we look to recovery, I'll try and illustrate some of the role that I think local public health can play as we face some very known challenges that have probably been talked about throughout the course of the day, and some of you might even be facing in your own lives. I know I often have to check myself and make sure that I'm walking the talk of the prescriptions that I give. So we know from a lot of evidence that the pandemic has meant that many members in our community are experiencing increased mental health stress. We also know that we're facing a challenge of underscreening for chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, and others. And then we have this very real task of trying to recover from this emergency that's been taxing us for 3 years, and which is still here. It's present, but in a different form. And so recovering from the COVID pandemic also means that we need to think about incorporating the protections from COVID into our routine lives. So what could that look like from a local public health point of view? If we first talk about the increased mental distress program, I'll just give an example of some of the work of public health with programming and early childhood development that helps, for example, mothers with postpartum depression or who are facing other challenges that would help them or prevent or make more difficult the parenting and promotion of healthy child development. We have public health programs that go in and assist that family because a good healthy start really builds a foundation for healthy life overall. And part of the interaction of the public health staff with those families at its core is about supporting positive mental health, because it's very hard to make healthy actions or even contemplate the choice of a healthy option when you're under mental duress. So that's a very concrete example. The public health nurses, help those mothers by providing referrals and assistance to resources that can address not only their mental health, but the other determinants of health that drive opportunities for health. So that means connecting them with agencies, potentially around housing and other services for their children. So if I think about the other issue I raised, which is the recovery from the pandemic and incorporating the routine protections into our everyday life, if you just think about the booth over there where there was COVID vaccine offered, it's making sure that that's not the only thing that we're targeting, that it's incorporated into all the other things that we know are challenging health. So you see the COVID vaccine being offered, people getting massages, the dancing that was offered, because that's real life. We have full lives that have many dimensions. And just like we might reach for the sunscreen before we leave the house in summertime, We also need to think about COVID vaccine at the right time for the right demographics as just part of the routines of life. So if I'm going to conclude about what is it going to take for our communities to thrive, I think so many of the ingredients are already here, and sometimes we don't stop and recognize them. I always say that Black excellence is just excellence. I was at a plantation in South Louisiana less than 2 weeks ago, and I asked the very naive question as I was in the slave cabins, did the slave build this? And the guide, who was a descendant of slaves from the area, said, yes, the slaves built this and everything you see on this property. And I thought, of course. And as I went into the big house and saw the beautiful hand-carved fireplace and the murals on the ceiling and the very obvious examples and displays of wealth, which were signaling that the family had the ability to have this wealth, I saw just the very concrete example there that all the myths that constitute anti-Black racism are actually in stark contrast to the very physical representation in that house, that it was Black talent and excellence that created everything on that property. So if we just acknowledge all the strengths we have as a community, the dancing that was going on today. Why is dancing important? Well, it's not just physical activity. When you're in sync with someone and you're swaying to the music, you're part of something bigger. You're showing that you're connected to the person next to you, that you care enough about them to watch their moves so that you can move with them. So just as a metaphor, all the ingredients we have are there. We have the talent, we have the innovation, we have the community culture of caring of others and knowing how to work together to not just highlight problems, but address them. If we just build on what we've achieved with our COVID response to make COVID less of a threat, I think we can tackle many of the complex subjects represented here by our fellow speakers. So I want to just acknowledge the leadership in our community. We not only led for ourselves, we led for the city, and we had international attention. So never for 1 second doubt that if we acknowledge and keep using our talents and energy, we can make underhousing and underemployment and undereducation not a story of disproportionate negative impact, but disproportionate positive impact in the Black community. So I just want to celebrate. We have a vibrant culture with lots of energy. I'm very excited to be part of the solutions to all the things we're talking about today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nancy. Thank you. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Carl James will speak about our recovery efforts as related to our education system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation, and to the task force, and especially to Kwatu, who invited me to do this. We'll be talking about education, and I also start off with some slides. I thought we've been talking about what's our responsibility and what's the state's responsibility or the education responsibility to us. And I thought I'd start by talking about equity. You know, it's not just about equality that we're looking for. And as you notice, my slide is trying to say, no, it's equity. And this is different from equality, whereas you're going to treat people the same, you know, and because democracy or merit, et cetera, What we want is paying attention to the particular conditions of our community and the people within our community if we're going to really result from the work that we give them. So we want to move towards the whole process of equity. Sorry. And also, over the day, we have been talking about race, anti-Black racism, and how racism operates. We're not looking at these individual things, individual exchanges, interactions, etc., etc. We want to move towards looking at how the institutions that we're talking about, how the medical system, the school system, the environment, all these kinds of systems operate. And that's what I want to suggest, that it's those institutions that we have to pay attention to, and not sometimes the individual teachers. And so I see that whereas we're talking about racism, we're talking about racism as a system that so involves and engages our Canadian society that it's very, very difficult to escape of it. And so all these intersections we are trying to address, and so those ways in which I'm thinking that we need to start thinking of not those things. So whereas I will talk about the students and teachers right now, I also want us to think about how it's the system in which we live, the institutions in which they are educated, that's operating in their lives. The next thing I want to say, before I talk to students, is paying attention to the fact, what's the projection? What does the data show? And this is 2016. In a few weeks, you'll be getting Statistics Canada information about the data with regard to Black people. And that's coming up in a few weeks. But for now, the 2016 data show the increase of our community. And therefore, what does that signal then for not only our community, but Canada as a whole, especially as Canada talk about having to increase its population? And then, we're so paying attention to the fact that we are a diverse community, diverse society. And all this diversity means that, yes, you know, how Blackness and anti-Black racism is going to be also experienced differently, and how people are going to come to it, and paying attention to all these. Okay, so given all that context then, what are we paying attention to when we think of education? And here is where I think racism with COVID and everything that has happened since then have exacerbated the inequities in our society. So I want to talk a bit about how we're going to reimagine education after now. How are we going to start dealing with our situation in the school system and with teachers and others in order to be able to change the situation for Black students. Before COVID and so forth, there were a number of inequities that we know. The overrepresentation of students in low educational programs that, of course, did not yield them the kinds of opportunities that we would have expected them to get. The overrepresentation. Teachers' expectations of our students have not been what we expect of teachers. And a number of other things, such as high rates of suspensions, expulsion from school, all this before COVID. And you can imagine how these things have been exacerbated since COVID. Again, beyond those students and what goes on in school, and we know COVID, we know also the larger context in which we are operating. And therefore, we have to look at the society, the communities from which we come, and how COVID and Dr. Allen talked about much of this, talked about where some of these issues are experienced most. So we have to pay attention to communities in which are our community, many of our people live in. And we talk about how in low-income communities, marginalized communities, access to opportunities, the tendency to use the bus, and therefore you're more likely to be able to be getting disease transmission and so forth. So all these is the context in which our students. So the next thing I want them to know, okay, how has COVID exacerbated the situation for students? Studies have shown that breaks from school over the summer for many students, especially low-income students, especially marginalized students, studies have shown that when they return, the gap between them and others is increased. So you can imagine how since COVID, the ways in which students have been educated have exacerbated the situation for Black students. The other thing that we might think online learning would have enabled and supported learning in a different way. But remember, teachers are not accustomed to online learning. So therefore, online learning has not been the kinds of situation that students have been able to gain much of the education that they want. And so now, after all these year or two of being outside of school, students have returned to the classroom. And many students, once they return to the classroom, will tell you that they're feeling that they did not get in those 2 years the kinds of education that they wanted. They did not get the preparation for school. And some of them who finished high school and were about to go to university have said they put off going to university. And studies have done with Black students. They say, I did not go to university this year because I did not think I got everything I needed in high school. Or I don't feel that getting accustomed to university would be easy for me because it's going to be online. So we have to think of how all those things are making it difficult for our students and our young people to be able to navigate the system and to be able to succeed. Hence, when we're going to think, therefore, of how we're going to address the situation of our students, we have to think that students are going to say they're going to work harder, they're going to try their best, they're going to put all their efforts in, but they're putting it in after COVID, which therefore they did not have the foundation they needed in education, and therefore all those kinds of things. And we have to start thinking that it's not just now. I'm thinking of education, not just high school students, and I know I talked of high school students, and I've done the research with high school students in university. But think of this happening from grade 1 through PhD programs. So therefore, it's a whole generation of students that we're talking about all these years. How we're going to respond to them and how we're going to work with them. It's therefore, we're going to have to reimagine the education that students need to have. And I know I'm running out of time. So reimagining education would mean that we're going to not therefore just simply think that learning as has been conceptualized and how we have been learned is going to be this. We're going to have to insist that the curriculum that students are exposed to, the kinds of people that are going to be teaching with them from high school, from junior school, all the way through university, must be people who are giving them an education related to what their needs are. And therefore, I think if nothing else, COVID and the inequities that we know are coming out of COVID should energize and bring us the kinds of resolve to make education much more related and more meaningful for the students and for our population, if we're really going to be able to address our situation in the way. And let's not just talk about how it's about just simply us as Black people, because if we don't get involved and if we don't make contributions in the way we have been contributing, the entire society misses out on very important kinds of a contribution. So we have to start thinking about, it's not just us, we have to, when we talk about it, we have to say how the society as a whole is missing out on very, very important contributions that we make, and we have been making, and we continue to make in terms of what the society is today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. James. I will open the floor up for any questions that anybody might have for the panel. Seeing no questions, I will ask one, if the organizers will allow me, because I do want to underscore the point that Dr. Angela Robertson made earlier around political will. And as a former politician who left because I saw firsthand the lack of political will when it came to our community, how do each of your various initiatives, how are they impeded by that lack of political will? And how can us as a community who could come out in numbers, who have power, how do we circumvent when there is a lack of political will? Who wants to go first? You want to go? Yeah.
Why don't I start off? Maybe I'll put it into three parts. When I take a look at the number of elected officials from the Black community now over the last 5 years, 10 years, if you go back 25 years, there's just been an incredible number of individuals in the political system, in government, at senior levels from the community. So in one sense, it becomes an irony about political will. Part of it is a community recognizing that many times thinking of it from the point of view or that we're not at the table as decision makers, it's changing that mindset to say now that some of us that the voice and the context and the concerns of the community get. The second one for me is that decision makers, elected officials, government is only as strong as engaged citizens. And that then says that the community, this engagement is a part of civic engagement. And how do you take that civic engagement and also make sure it's engagement seen in terms of a political context? And what that also means then is how do you get the message across and what is the message and so forth. The mayor, I understand, was here earlier today. So the question is, what is the core messages that the community would like to get across? Not 50 messages, just one or two. And one or two that basically sets up key performance indicators that says, when you're giving me your platform, tell me how it makes my community, how it makes me better. And to ask that question, demand of that as an indicator, as a key performance indicator. Lastly, though, in terms of political will, I don't know if we lack political will in the classic sense. I think it's important to recognize that we are subject to an incredible set of competing alternatives. And consequently, it's really easy for someone to focus on something else if by some chance they feel that they don't need to focus on you. And I think to Carl's comment, Canada, in terms of the demographics of Canada, we will be communities, Black community will be an increasing component percentage-wise of Canadian society, of Toronto and the likes. If we, by some chance, leave 3.5% or 5% of the population out, that means it becomes an incredible lack of not meeting the potential capacity of the society. That means then the society as a whole has an interest in asking the question, how can we include you, as much as we can ask the question, how can we be included in the prosperity of Canada and rewarded for that contribution as well?
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
So just to add to what Garen was saying, from the bureaucrat side, one of the things that we need from the Black population is to make sure that you are engaging with your elected officials and that you are, asking questions around what it is that they are doing for you, and also holding them accountable. Because, when we're going about our daily business, one of the key things that we do is to check in with those elected officials and to get an understanding of what they're hearing from their local communities, which in turn informs policy decision making and also links to what levels of funding are released in all of the government programs and services and how much of it will go to our communities. And so I can't stress enough that it is very important that we need to get engaged with politics. We need to be listening to the issues that are going on in society. We need to be engaging those local officials who in turn will make sure that as public servants that we're coming up with the solutions that are going to address the issues and challenges that you're facing on a daily basis.
I very much like that question because over the past, since COVID, and more recently since George Floyd's death, we've heard a lot of racial reckoning. We've seen the movements that's going on, not only in Canada, but sometimes I always wonder if EDID, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and some people have now added decolonizing is taking place. And we hear lots of governments and institutions, including my own, talk about EDID, and therefore they're doing the necessary kind of cluster hiring, they're getting all those kind of things. But we have to remember what Angela Robinson said today. It's not just simply, we wonder sometimes if this discourse of EDID, this discourse is the initiatives, the pleasures that we hear institutions and all these other places are putting out and hiring Black people or putting Black people in certain kinds of, are we getting the changes needed that will enable us, when we go in these positions, to be able to make the impact? Or are we just there? The institutions are simply, the policies remain the same, the programs remain the same. We're just simply trying to make sure that we will pledge, but actual change is not taking place. So it's very, very important then that we should not just be hired to do equity work. You know, many often, if you see, especially in many of these institutions, like I did some research recently looking at universities, and they hired a number of equity vice president or equity, and many of them are Black, most of them. Then when you look further, the presidents, the vice presidents, and all those people remain people who are not Black, but who do not come to understand equity in the way we'd want them to understand equity. So we don't just want us in those equity positions. So when you talk about political will, it's not just the equity position. I'm not being hired. I don't want to be hired just simply to be able to do equity work. I want to be able to hire to do the administrative kind of work, the presidential work like Gervin. At the same time, knowing the president also understand or bring experience about the community, about equity, that will be able to take what the person in the equity position into account as he or she or they present the information to them. Because if in leadership I'm not able to understand how you're bringing and understanding what you're saying, it might not go anywhere. So therefore, we need people in those other positions as well. The political leaders, the presidents, the political leaders, the government, all those kinds of things. We need them there. And so political will is not just to say we have equity, we have diversity, and we have inclusion, and we're decolonizing, and therefore we're going to get this thing going. We need people in those upper positions to understand what we're arguing for and to make those happen. Thanks.
Hi, I'm a little intimidated speaking on this topic. Sitting next to someone, who probably knows way more about this, but I'll just maybe give some observations. I don't know if they're quite advice, but if you just dissect the word will, it implies desire, right? So I think part of it is, how do you speak to the desire of the decision maker in front of you? And what I've observed is, as a caring community, we're putting often the case forward that this should be done because it's the right thing to do, and that's important. That's why we're a caring community. But we almost have to be able to tell that same story in the language of the desire of the decision maker in front of you. And often that desire is they want to see a good result that will reflect, well on them and the community. If there is a good visual and a good statistic or number with it, and a good story, a person or a community or an agency they can point to, that trifecta is often what leads to a decision being favored, often more than the so-called evidence, right? So you need all of them, but you have to be able to wind it in a way that's going to speak to the desire of that person in front of you. So that's where, the panelists are talking about. We need to have not just representation, but engagement at multiple levels and tables, so that all those parts of the package, the statistics, the story, can be woven together in multiple ways to speak to the right decision maker.
Thank you so much. Can we give our panel a round of applause, please? Thank you. I'm going to call up Dr. Akwatu Kenti. No, Candace Todd. Yes. Candace Todd, up to the stage. Thank you so much to each of our panelists. Thank you.
So really, I just wanted to thank our panel for such an engaging and important conversation. It is these conversations that will spark change in generations to come. So thank you. And again, a round of applause for everyone. Thank you. And I'm just here to introduce Dr. Akwatu Kente to the stage.
Okay. We have two more things to do before we say good afternoon or good evening. And I wanted to make a few points. And then my colleague, Dr. David Booth, will come up and, you say, don't go too far though. And say a few thank yous and acknowledgements. But I just wanted to not to repeat all of the wisdom, all of the research, all of the incredible truths. Now, some truths are evidence-based, some truths is experiential learning. So I'm not going to do all that, but I wanted to make 5 points about what we've been trying to do and what we must do in order for us to move forward. And the first point is a bit of Trini wisdom, Trinidadian wisdom or Caribbean wisdom, if you will, because I'm sure we say it in Trinidad, and I'm sure it's said in Creole, Patois, in other places. In Trinidad, we say, laugh and cry, there's live in the same house. Laugh and cry, there's live in the same house. And for purposes of this event, this 2 years or 3 years, this experience, this pandemic experience, that means a couple of things. One, framing. You have to own the framing. You shouldn't let anybody else frame your understanding and your experience for you. And that's very important, very important. Throughout history, if you study Canadian history, most of the framing of the Black experience is done by non-Black people. So we actually don't know what happened in New France with respect to the slavery experience, because we don't have any framing from our own people who were there, who analyzed it afterwards, like they do in other places. So that's number one, framing, perspective, understanding, so that instead of having post-traumatic disorder, you'll have post-traumatic growth. You understand? Laugh and cry, just live in the same house. That means you can cry all the time, or cry for a little bit, and then laugh and say, oh my God, could you believe what I had to go through? This is real pressure, and and that's COVID. But there's a third dimension to laugh and cry, that's live in the same house. It means people of different perspectives is live in the same house. You understand? And throughout COVID, one of the most beautiful lessons that didn't get as much play, but it did get some play in media, but which I'm so proud of, is that we've said throughout, if your family members, your friends, don't want to get vaccinated, don't give them no pressure. Love them the same way. Don't say, you can't come over here again. I had people who would say that, can't come. No, my best friend, I have 4 best friends, and my daughter's here, she could tell if I'm lying or if I'm lying. And one of them, he ended up in the hospital, and he's come out of the hospital, and he still didn't get vaccinated. But I have to love him all the same, because we've been through so much. Why would I add the pain of breaking up with someone I love because I'm a proponent of vaccines? Because I feel as though this is a significant matter. We have to love our people. We've been through so much. And that's why we say laugh and cry, live in the same house. You make different things out of it. That's lesson number one, takeaway number one from me. The second takeaway I want to leave you with is no people, no fete. Remember that? No people, no fete. So we are so grateful that not only that we have the people today for the fete, but we had the DJs, specialist DJs, real DJs. Them DJs know the music. They study the music. They give you the music that you need to hear to make you feel and heal and recover and grow and learn and prosper and find, just be nurtured. And that you had experts here. We have experts right across every field of endeavor. And there are 2 or 3 periods in history where we've drawn on them during a crisis. And this is one of them. And so it's so great to get the DJ, get the organizations who are out there, get the people, get our healers helping in their own way. So we walked our talk. We gave you the talk, you saw the presentations, but we walked our talk because we fostered healing. We had testing. So if you have problems, you don't have to talk to nobody. You come in, I think 70 people came in and get tests. So that might be 35 lives that are saved. Who knows? So we walk that talk, and that is important. It's not just about advising, it's about doing when you're advising because we're in an emergency. And that's always been a driving force. The fourth point, very important, we didn't make it explicit, but I'll make it explicit. African culture is therapeutic. And during this pandemic is unusual because it interrupted the way we deal with things as African people. I'm from Trinidad, and when somebody dies, we have 9 nights. And those 9 nights, I used to think about the 9 nights. I didn't like it because all kind of people coming in your house and drinking and eating your food, and they don't even know the person who's dead, but they come in anyway. You understand? And for 9 nights, yeah, it's like everybody coming. I had an aunt pass away, and I see. They said, "Yeah, I do nothing. People bringing drink, they bringing music, but all kind of people showing up, and it's so funny. They reach the door, they come in the door, they crying and they bawling and they throwing. I said, "You know my aunt? I love your aunt, boy. I love you." And I said, "You love her?" Anyhow, so we didn't have our 9 nights, and what that means is we have lots of unresolved grief that we are carrying with us, pain that we need to process in order to leave it behind. You understand? And so by ensuring that this cultural element is a strong element, the drumming, the dancing, the music, the old talk. Lyman and old talk is therapy for people, poor Black people. We've never thought of it as therapy. As a matter of fact, when I was my grandma said, "You don't go there and Lyman spoke to my when I will bust your ass, because they say, oh, it's all bad. You go and smoke or drink." But the talk, the old talk is therapy. You're talking about the oppression. You're getting it out. You're laughing. You say, "Oh, God, I can't believe this should happen to me." And you feel better. Your antibodies are boosted. Your immune system is boosted. And I didn't make the connection or the alignment, but our culture allows us to grieve, allows us to mourn, and allows us to heal. And it's been disrupted, and we have to reconstruct it. Now, it's very hard to explicitly and deliberately reconstruct something cultural because it seems artificial, but at the same time, we have so much burdens of pain, we don't have a choice. And we have African traditions that are foundations for that. And I like to impress upon people 2 last points, because we've had 4 mass deaths in the past 500 years. Mass deaths, 4. The slave trade was a mass death. People don't understand it as a mass death, but those ships used to throw over hundreds of people in the sea. And the only time we found out about it was when they tried to collect insurance, like the Zong massacre in 1781. Hundreds of people thrown overboard to maximize profits. It's a mass debt. That was the first mass debt. The second mass debt was upon emancipation. 1833 in the British Empire, 1863 in America. And the 5 years or the decade after emancipation saw more deaths of Black people than the decade before emancipation. And you wonder why. It's because the masters who were compelled to free the enslaved Africans, they were reimbursed. But that wasn't all. They still got unpaid labor. In the Caribbean, it's called the apprenticeship period. You had to give 60 hours of free work to the former plantations. And that's how the whole police system was created, actually. But what happened as a result? The masters get vexed. They say the state free you, the state should take care of you. I ain't taking care of you. So they had our labor, but absolutely nothing in return. And as a result, we experienced huge debt. And that was the first real, like the social determinants of health phenomena, because you didn't have food, you didn't have shelter, you didn't have clothing, you didn't have job, you didn't have work. In America, between 1863 and 1873, the 4 million people who had been freed, the 4 million Africans who had been freed, 1 million died. That's a fact. And a guy named Jim Downs wrote a book called Sick from Freedom. Sick from Freedom. And it's actually the first book that talks about the way social determinants of health and mortality was actually used against African people as free people, so that we wouldn't ever be really free. And the third one was HIV/AIDS, mass death. And it's still going on. And the fourth one, for the Western Hemisphere primarily, from Brazil, Colombia, the Caribbean, and North America, may be COVID. We don't have the numbers yet because we don't have the research. But the point is that we have gone through these phenomena, but this is the first time we have addressed it and actually within it made a difference as people of Africans, of Black people. And that is why I'm so proud to have been a member of this task force. And I want you to be proud that the people served you. And they didn't serve you because somebody asked them to be on a task force, they got a big name and all kind of thing. They served you because they loved you. And that's the modus operandi that we have, is the modus operandi we hope to infuse in any group that runs with the mantle that we are passing on as we end our tenure over the past 3 years. So muchas gracias, thank you very much, obrigado. And I use these terms because African people speak these languages and are the most speakers of those languages. Have a wonderful weekend and thank you so much for coming out.
I just have to say a few thanks to individuals and teams here. Have you enjoyed the session today? It's funny because our friend Akwatu is talking about, the end of the task force and this being, a sort of celebration of the task force. But I'm wondering whether it might be the beginning of something new. I'm wondering. And if you have appreciated today's event and if you've learned a lot, there's some questionnaires, evaluation forms. Please take them on your way out because we'd like to know what you felt about this session. Just very quickly, I'd just like to thank some people. Shuli, the manager of the events for Daniel Spectrum, for helping us to set up this venue. Sam, the venue supervisor and support team, and the tech team up there. Thank you very much, guys. We really appreciate what you've done. And Natalie White. You probably haven't seen her, but she's in the corner there. She's been responsible for the live team, so live stream, and the media. Please give her a round of applause. And of course, DynaCare. I think DynaCore is some sort of plumbing organization, right? But DynaCare looks at a different type of plumbing that we have. But DynaCare, more than 70 people went through the DynaCare booth today to get tested. Thank you so much, DynaCare. We really appreciate what you've done. Thank you. All of the keynote speakers, panelists, moderators, health and wellness practitioners, people doing the massage, facial therapies, personal trainer. I mean, those benches were never empty. I couldn't even get on. But thank you so much for what you've done. the medical specialists, the health and wellness booths, the nurses that came from far and wide. Wasn't the food good? Come on, wasn't the food good? Thank you to Tasties. Remember Tasties if you want to organize something like this. And the Black Scientist Museum, all the entertainers, 98.7, and the drummers. And we had a lot of volunteers. A big hand for the volunteers, please. But mostly I want to thank you for hanging in there, you for making this possible. We had over 200 people pre-registered for this event, and we really appreciate the support. And it really inspires us to continue, maybe a different type of task force, but we're inspired by today's events. We have one more thing to do, and I'm going to ask Juanita to come forward. You're not going to do it by yourself? It's a hot mic, so be careful. Okay. I wonder if she's here. The co-chair for the Black Scientist Task Force is Candice. Candice at the back. Please come forward because it is Candice's birthday today. So let's sing happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Candice. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you guys so much for this. Again, I said it this morning, and I'm crying now, but this is a real full circle moment for me. Being on this task force has been such a pleasure, and it is such a blessing to me to see community members out here getting their blood work done, getting a massage, getting a stretch for the first time, engaging with our wellness booths, and engaging in these important conversations that we're having today. So thank you so much for coming out. Really appreciate you all, and have a great day, guys. Well, that's what I was saying. I was like, just